Welcome to the Commission Corps 2022 rollout meeting. Hopefully this meeting will be fairly easy and quick, and but still very informational, so you guys can get all the information you need. I do apologize. Apparently I have a little frog in my throat, so I will try not to cough in your virtual faces. Did you all notice how long this year's Corps is going to be? 3.5 hours. So we haven't ever had a 3.5 hour Corps, as far as I'm aware. I don't know, or a 4.5. But we were looking at the material, and we were pretty set on we wanted a 3 hour. We feel that's a nice, good time, but we just didn't feel comfortable trying to squeeze all this information into that time frame. But we also didn't want to drag it out. So that's why we decided to do the half. Sounds kind of fun to me, honestly, something new. To start out with the legislative update section, Max Pond has graciously joined us to give us that update. So without further ado, I will be turning it over to him to start us off.
Well, thanks everybody. I also kind of have a frog in my throat today too, so I might have to cough or something in your virtual faces, unfortunately, maybe. But anyway, again, thanks for being here. I was going to mention, I don't know like what my witty like nickname on my Zoom would be, but I also don't want to ask this group. So we'll just go ahead and move right into today. So anyway, thanks again for having me come talk to you guys today. IREC, the instructors, is going to be fun to hear some of your questions today. But again, just here to give you a quick update from the State Association perspective on the 2022 Idaho legislative session. Also spend a little bit of time on kind of what we're looking at this summer leading into the next legislative session. If there's any questions during my remarks, don't hesitate to stop me, but I'll certainly pause and stuff every so often to see if there are any questions. So with that, we'll go ahead and just start with, again, this last session. As I reviewed the legislative recap documents that IREC put out, there's only 3 things that I would add to that, and I'll highlight them real briefly here. Number 1, there were historic income tax cuts approved and signed by the governor this year, about $600 million in tax cuts. It also dropped the individual and corporate tax rates from 6.5 to 6%. Number 2, over $200 million was approved and will be going to bridges and disrepair all around the state. Also kind of addressing some other deferred maintenance issues as well. In addition to that infrastructure dollars, or those infrastructure dollars, $300 million was used of federal ARPA funds that will go specifically to water and sewer upgrades. So another big good thing for infrastructure there. And the third thing I'll mention and add is the Idaho Realtors, this year worked very closely with the Idaho Workforce Housing Coalition, along with the governor's office. And we were happy to, help spearhead ultimately was a successful legislative effort to allocate $50 million to help develop and really, most importantly, I think to finish thousands of workforce housing units around the state. This is North Idaho, South Idaho, East Idaho, West Idaho. In fact, there's specific carve out in the legislation for rural Idaho. So it's not just going to be going out to the biggest cities and counties around the state. So that was really great thing. We were happy to get that done. In fact, it was the first time that the Idaho legislature has actually allocated any kind of funding for that kind of program. So excited to get that done. Excited to see IHFA, who will be at the helm, really distributing those funds over the next 3 years. How they do that and who they award those monies to will be interesting. In fact, they'll have a document, essentially some guidance on how you can apply, who can apply, that kind of thing, should be coming out. They said early this month, so I would expect it anytime, and I can certainly provide that information to IREC as well. So again, these investments in tax cuts, infrastructure, housing, all really good news for the industry. IR was happy to be a part of those efforts as well. So I just wanted to mention those real quick. Any questions on any of those three things, or any questions on anything else on the IREC legislative recap? Okay. Again, I'll pause every so often and we'll have time at the end too. So if you do have a question, don't hesitate though.
Hey,
so
Max,
again,
I just have one question. Do we know how much that is for those for that housing? Did you say that?
Yeah, so it was a $50 million investment, and that was our federal ARPA funds as well, but it'll go out over the next 3 years. Okay. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, no problem. So again, as we kind of move like through the summer, I start getting a bit of a snapshot, I guess, of what the next session might look like. Certainly deal with legislative issues throughout the summer, but this summer, or I don't even know if it's summer yet, honestly, but this interim between sessions, some legislative issues have certainly been popping up already. And so I do want to quickly talk about them because I think that some of them might generate questions from your students and from your licensees in your classes. So again, if you have questions, I'm trying to explain it as best I can, but we'll see how it goes here. These are kind of long-winded explanations of what's going on. But anyway, so the first thing is the homeowner's exemption. So think about what the homeowner exemption is, what it does for homeowners, and think about that as I continue to address what's going on. So in 2020, Idaho Realtors passed a bill that removed the April 15th deadline for folks to apply for and receive the homeowner's exemption. We all know that, but again, just to recap, if someone purchased an existing rental that they intended to turn into their primary residence and they purchased after April 15th of that year, they had to wait to receive the benefit that other homeowners would have gotten in that year. So the bill that we passed in 2020 did fix that problem for homeowners, yet some county assessors have been dragging their feet on implementation since the law went into effect in January of 2021. So again, we passed it in 2020. The session in 2020 ended in April maybe, and so they had that the rest of that year to figure out how they were going to implement it. That was what we talked about after the bill passed. Anyway, they didn't do much of that work and just, I guess, planned on complaining about it and dragging their feet like I've talked about. So essentially throughout their foot dragging, IR has worked with the Attorney General's office, the Idaho State Tax Commission, several lawmakers to convince the county assessors that they had to implement the law as written. Now this worked in several counties. It worked in Kootenai County, it worked in Ada County, it worked in several other counties where they initially were dragging their feet. So as we move forward, I mean, most of these counties are now implementing it the correct way, except for two, Latah and Lincoln counties. About a month ago, they had a hearing with the State Tax Commission on the issue that they're having with implementing the law. And the tax commission said, well, sorry, but you still have to implement the law as written. They subsequently, those two counties, Latah and Lincoln, subsequently sued the Idaho State Tax Commission. Again, the dispute centers around, again, 2 of the 44 Idaho counties deciding to prorate the homeowner's exemption, even after legal and regulatory guidance to do the opposite. You know, essentially, the new law does not allow for proration, and thus homeowners, get to enjoy the full exemption regardless of when they purchase the home, around, whenever they purchase the home throughout the year. Counties don't want to give up that revenue, essentially is what it's coming down to. IR is not included in this lawsuit, but we're certainly watching it very closely. So that's kind of one angle on the homeowners exemption. Are there any questions on that front? Again, that's mostly a legal issue at this point. I can see it possibly turning into another legislative issue, but at this point, I think it's going to be quite a hurdle for those counties to get over, for the tax commission to go back on, or sorry, a judge to go back on what the tax commission and the attorney general's office has said, because, well, I just think that we're right, but also there is, I can't remember the section of code off the top of my head right now, but there's a section of code of Idaho code that says, you know, if a state agency, and here we have two, the attorney general's office, also a constitutional officer, and the Idaho State Tax Commission, if they've made a regulatory ruling, that the court defers to that ruling. So anyway, that's kind of in the weeds, but anyway, that's kind of where that situation is right now. Are there any questions on the legal front there? Okay, so the second issue surrounding the homeowners exemption that's kind of popped up in the last several days is essentially the idea of possibly moving back to a fluctuating index that would determine your homeowners exemption amount, right? This is a bad idea for a few reasons. I know, I know who's on this call, and so I know that many of you know the background here and stuff. So I apologize for reiterating things that you already know, but I think it's good to kind of have to revisit some of this and get the background. So there's an idea out there right now from a Canyon County lawmaker to go back to a fluctuating index, like I said, that would determine your homeowner's exemption amount. IR has a long history of opposing this type of idea. In fact, you know, back when the legislature, you know, voted to go back to a more stable system that we have now, obviously it's not perfect, but certainly more stable. IR was a part of that effort. So when Idaho was on the index and it started to go down from like 2009 to 2012 during the recession, we saw a large tax shift back onto owner occupied homes. Sorry. You know, so as values were falling, we saw owner occupied homes seeing their tax increase. Again, because the homeowners exemption was indexed, it was shifting to other other property types back onto owner occupied homes. Again, because of the index was in place, this change, this tax shift also happened with no legislative oversight, no debate. That's also very bad. So essentially, you know, what am I saying? I'm saying that we're working throughout the summer on these issues surrounding the homeowners exemption. As some of them make news, I know that when the lawsuit for the tax commission came out, I think that there was some news coverage on that, and some of your licensees might see that and ask you some questions. So I just wanted to provide a little bit of background on that, and certainly if you have any other questions on that or it comes up in your classes, I'm here to answer any questions as I can. Obviously, on the legal side, you probably want to talk to Jason Risch, not me. So, but anyway, any questions that I can address on any of those two fronts?
My question's on our outline. Our outline says homestead exemption. Is that what they were calling it for the House Bill 564, where we're talking about homeowners, or is that just a misprint?
It's the same section of code.
Okay.
Yeah.
Max, sorry, can you reiterate why Idaho realtors are against the legislation? Just because during the recession it fell so low, that's why?
Well, yeah,
that's the main reason.
There's a lot more that I could explain there, and I apologize for not doing that. So the index that we were on, and I'm not saying all indexes would do this, but I would imagine they would, because what we see is that indexes are not in real time. So there's a lag in what's going on. So if you hit a recession, you're going to hit a point where the index is not responding to the market, right? So there's going to be, I think when we were on it, there was like between a 6-month and 18-month lag in when those prices would be reflected. And so what we saw are taxes going up during a recession on homeowners. But honestly, the worst part about it is that shift happens, that your homeowner's exemption and the taxes that you pay to get into a home could be different throughout the year. You don't really know. You don't have any predictability in that. And so, and again, when that happens with no legislative oversight, we see that as a bad thing. All right, any other questions? So one of the last things I'll mention here before I let you guys get back to work here is, Idaho just went through a huge primary election. There were about, I think it was 19 incumbents who lost, many of whom were appropriators and chairmen of different committees. In addition to that, about 1/3 of the Idaho legislature as a whole was going to be new anyway. So there's a lot of changes in the Idaho legislature moving forward. But the good news is IR as an organization is already hitting the ground, getting to know these new folks, forming relationships so that we can continue to work with IREC and its instructors to make sure the real estate industry continues to thrive here in Idaho. So if you have any questions, I'll answer them now, but also you can email me anytime you want. My email is mpond@idahorealtors.com. And with that, I'll answer any questions or let you guys get back to work. All right. Well, thanks again, guys. I really appreciate it. I'm sure I'll see many of you. Actually, I'm going to be traveling around the state quite a bit here in the next week or so. And so I know that I'll be in Southeast Idaho. I just came back from North Idaho. So anyway, good to see everybody, and we will see you soon.
Thanks, Max. So let's start with case law. There weren't too many changes to the case law section. The biggest changes were that we removed 2 of the easement cases. One of them was the Easternly versus Hal Pacific Properties, and then the Latava versus Green Enterprises. Both of them had to deal with easements. A lot of the feedback we got at the pilot was there were so many easement cases, which there were, but that was kind of the cases that just came within the year. So we did leave one that had to deal with easements, but we did take these other 2 out. We also did add an instructor note to the Choice Speed versus Montour case, just to kind of talk about some of the consequences of that case. So that usually for case law, it's usually just one handout, but that's why this year we have an instructor guide and a student guide. I did get a question, does that mean they get 3.5 hours of CE? Core works differently. The requirements are 12 hours of CE and then 2 commission cores. It doesn't matter how long core is, they still have to have 2. It doesn't count for their CE. And then of course, for case law, we did update the PowerPoint to match all of these, or these 2 changes. Any questions about case law? All right, guideline review. There was a small change to the guideline itself, specifically FAQ number 4. This was one that we discussed during the pilot, and it has to do with do businesses and brokerages have to include Inc. or LLC in all of their advertising, which is a shift because based on the discussions we had around that, yes, they do. In the past, we have been teaching students that no, they don't need to include that. But going forward, we really are really hopeful that you as our instructors will start implementing, telling them that yes, they do have to start including it. I wouldn't I don't think anybody is going to get in massive amounts of trouble if their advertisements aren't specifically up to par. I think it'll be much more of a learning curve for us and then for our licensees as well. We did also revise the instructor notes for the guidelines section just to talk about it more in depth so that students are more introduced to it since it is a brand new guideline. We changed the word shirts in that little graph about where advertisements may be to apparel to cover a more diverse place for advertisements, I guess. And then we did add an instructor note on page 2 under B1B, and that again discusses the idea that licensees need to start adding the LLC and Inc., etc., to their advertisements going forward.
Alice, can I jump in real quick?
Oh yeah.
Sorry. Apparently, when you're a host, you don't get to raise your hand. You have to do it manually. Surprise. So I know the #1 question you're going to get on that change in advertising, which we know we've taught it forever the other way, is that if they don't want to include the Inc. or the Corp. Or the LLC, then it would be to file a DBA or an assume business name form with us, which is a free form. It's on our website. The only thing is you can't have more than one assumed business name. So if they already have one, then they have to decide what they want to do with it. Also, if they do have an assumed business name, that is what they have to advertise in. We had a lot of debate in the commission. We talked to our attorney about it. I consulted 3 different attorneys, and the verdict was that the best way for them to protect themselves is by advertising with their full legal name. That's what the law says, and that does include the Inc. or LLC unless they have an assumed business name filed.
Thank you. All right. Oh, and then on one of the advertising examples where is this advertising compliant or not, it is picture 9. We had a lot of discussion about this one at the pilot because it's unclear if everyone in the picture is licensed. So we changed the answer to probably, as long as everyone is licensed. But this is a great opportunity for you guys to have discussions with the class to see how correct advertising may be taken as incorrect. You want to make sure all your bases are covered and think about it from somebody else's perspective. And then of course we matched the PowerPoint with all of those. Also, we did include a note that if you have examples of other advertisements that you'd like to include in that section, if they are good advertisements, awesome. However, if they are advertisements that aren't compliant, please make sure that they're out of state, just so that we're not offending any specific agent that may or may not be in your class at that time. So something to keep in mind. You don't want to pull up an advertisement and somebody in the back raise their hand and say, hey, that's me. Unless it's a good one, then it'd be cool. All right. Any questions about the guideline review? The other question I think we'll get is, will the LLC Inc. new rule be retroactive in respect to their current materials? So I would say with that one, personally, I don't see any of our enforcement team going out and digging through advertisements looking for it. It may be something that if there is a complaint filed against them for something else that they mention within their complaint. But from what my understanding is, it's more of a learning curve. Yes, Melissa.
Sorry, am I muted? I can't remember. Nope. Okay. So I got a similar question in the chat box, and I talked to enforcement about this a little bit. And what they do right now, I think some of you know this, but maybe not everybody does. Unless they have another problem with somebody, they take an educational approach. They make a phone call or they send an email and say, hey, your advertising's out of compliance. Update your advertising and send us a picture, send us the information. And then they just kind of keep an eye on it. They really don't want to go after anybody for advertising if they don't have to. Now, if someone receives that educational phone call or that information and either totally ignores it or goes on and decides that, hey, I'm going to fix it now, but I'm going to go back to my old way, then they would take a more serious approach. But they do intend to make an educational phone call if they find something or something's reported. That's the initial approach. I don't know that they've set any kind of time frame. That's how we've always handled advertising complaints, unless it's really egregious. They just try to, those are the little nitpicky things. And honestly, you guys know, we've talked about this before. It's usually licensees complaining about other licensees. It's not consumers. And so we're trying to really focus our more heavy-handed enforcement approach on the things that really directly affect consumers.
All right, any other questions about that? Go to troublesome trends. All right, this one did go through quite a few changes from the pilot. We did condense and reformat the material just so it was a little less narrative and a little bit more outline, like our traditional style. Along with those changes, we also did take quite a few of the case studies and activities that were there in the pilot, and we moved them into a separate document that we titled Supplemental Activities. What this means is that we had great success with those activities at the pilot, but unfortunately, we just don't have enough time to do it in a traditional class with our 3.5 hour time frame. However, we wanted you to have them because sometimes, especially if you have like a really small group, sometimes class can kind of fly by. Maybe they're not picking up on all of the main points you're talking about. Maybe you've decided that you're tired of teaching this particular case study and you want to kind of switch it up, do a little bit. We wanted you to have a little bit more options. So in that supplemental activity document is you have all of the instructor guides first, and then you'll have all of the student papers as well. That way it should be easier to print off. So we moved 3 case studies and then the forgery pop quiz, and then we also included a crossword if you want to ever swap activities or do anything like that. They were a lot of fun to make, and I think they were successful, so feel free to interject them or not. One thing to keep in mind though is that if you do plan to swap activities like that, the supplemental activities are not in the PowerPoint, so you would need to include them if you want to use them. A little bit more information about troublesome trends is for the lackluster license maintenance section. We broke E&O insurance and CE sections apart. We added discussion questions about E&O, and then we expanded the CE requirement section to include licensing period along with examples. Along those lines, we also, this is one of the changes that just recently happened, is we created a short explainer video that talks about the licensing periods and talks about the different paths that some licensees will need to take in order to reactivate their license. This part of it at the pilot was a little bit confusing just because it's such a kind of a complicated topic. And so Seychelle was wonderful enough to do the voiceover for our slides. You're more than welcome to play the video in class if you want to, or you're more than welcome to just use it as an instructor guide. The link is in the instructor guide and it will take you to a YouTube video. The video's like 4.5 minutes long, 4 minutes, so it won't take up too much time. And then of course, as always, if you have students who are just desperately confused, please have them call the commission. We'll do our best to kind of get them back on the right track. Really the confusing part enters is if they're a licensee that has gone inactive, active, inactive, back and forth a lot of the times. So they just need to make sure that they have everything before they reactivate. That's kind of where the confusion comes in. And unfortunately, you guys are unable to provide them insight since you don't have access to their record. So that's why they should just call us. Any questions about that particular portion of troublesome trends? Neato. All right.
Alice,
yes.
not to throw a kink in things, were you going to show it?
Oh, do you want me to?
Yeah, if you want to.
Okay, sure. Why not? Let me pull it
That
up.
way people can ask questions now if they have questions as they're watching it.
Brilliant.
Where can we find that link?
It is in the instructor guide. I can tell you the page number in just a second.
David, sorry, I'm also going to have it posted to the FAQ page on our website, the education page, and the licensing page, because I think that it will maybe help those that are more visually oriented that struggle to figure it out. They'll have a quick resource if they can't get a hold of us.
Great, thanks.
Started without my, okay. Share screen. All right, can you see my screen? I can't see anybody's faces, so somebody has to say yes or no.
Yes.
Awesome, thank you.
Initial licensing periods may vary in length and will be dependent on when your application is received at the Real Estate Commission in relation to your birth date. Your licensing period will always end at 5 p.m. Mountain Time on the last day of your birth month for your licensing period. After your initial licensing period, all licensing periods will be 2 years. You will need to remember if your license will expire on odd or even years, your license will always expire at 5 p.m. Mountain Time on the last day of your birth month. A salesperson may renew their license on active or inactive status. If they wish to renew their license on active status, they will need to...
Mike, Mike J, do you have a question?
Oh, it automatically changed and put up my hand, so I was frantically trying to turn that off. Sorry.
Okay.
Complete 12 hours status, they will need to complete 12 hours of continuing education elective credits and 2 commission core classes. For their first renewal, that 12 hours must consist of post-license education. For subsequent licensing periods, they may choose whatever 12 hours of continuing education elective credit they wish. If a salesperson wishes to renew their license on inactive status, no continuing education is required to renew their license on inactive status. However, all continuing education requirements must be met prior to placing their license back on active status. If this is the first activation outside of their initial licensing period, they will need to complete 12 hours of post-license education and 2 commission core classes. If they renewed their license on active status for their current licensing period, no education is required to activate the license. If they renewed their license on inactive status for the current licensing period, they will need to consider if the license has been activated yet within this licensing period. If it has, no education is required. If they have not, they will need to complete 12 hours of continuing education elective credit and 2 commission core classes. Post-license education must consist of one course entitled Post-License Fundamentals. This is an 8-hour course. You have your choice for your remaining 4 hours. You may take Post-License Pricing, Marketing, and Advertising, or Post-License Professionalism, Negotiations, and Closings, or Post-License Introduction to Commercial Real Estate. All education must be completed at the time of renewal. Brokers wishing to renew their license on active status must also complete 12 hours of continuing education elective credit and 2 commission core classes. Brokers that wish to renew their license on inactive status do not need to complete any education. However, once they wish to activate their license again, they will need to complete all required education prior to activating their license. If a broker is currently on inactive status and wishes to place their license on active status, they will want to review how they last renewed their license. If they renewed their license on active status, there is no additional education required at this time. If they last renewed their license on inactive status, they will want to review if they've had an activation this current licensing period. If they have, no additional continuing education is required. If they have not activated their license after an inactive renewal, they will need to complete 2 commission core classes and 12 hours of continuing education elective credit.
I don't know why there are random long pauses at parts. We did our very best to get them out. I probably made a funny face. Also, when you optimize a video on Zoom, it takes everybody else's faces away. I don't like that. Any questions about the video? Clear as mud, clear as glass. I'm gonna go with glass since no one's talking. Okay. So again, that is in your instructor guide. It is on page 4 above those graphs. That was one of the, when Mike J asked if anything had changed, that would be one of the big changes. It's just that we included that. Okay. All right. Section 2 of Troublesome Trends is the real estate disclosures and adverse material effects. The only changes we made there where we took away the case study and moved it to the supplemental part. I think that's a fun case study. I kind of miss it, but we just don't have enough time. For the forgery section, we made the forgery quiz supplemental. We also removed the definition of forgery. In our pilot, we got a little lost in the weeds on that, and so we worried your classroom would too. We removed the trouble with time case study and put it with the supplemental materials. And then we increased the information about electronic signatures, and then we reduced the information about power of attorney and just made more resources in case anybody is interested or wants to learn more about it. They have some resources available to them. For the misidentification of industry roles section, we revised a discussion question and then we moved it to the beginning of that section. Really, that question, we went through a couple of rounds of editing on it. We really want them to think about the idea of how many times have they been in a transaction or just been talking to a licensee and they weren't sure who their broker was. I think you guys will be a little bit surprised at how many stories they'll probably have about that. Then let's see, we also added, for the mix and match activity where they match definitions with the role, we did remove the term licensee. The definition of that one could have fit in various different categories. So we removed that one. And then we changed the time frame to 60 seconds. At the pilot, we had 90 seconds. You guys are more than welcome to kind of play around with that if you want to. If you think it's too short, you'll just want to make sure and replace the timer in the PowerPoint.
Alice, you've got a question for Mike J.
Oh, yes.
I don't know what. Whenever somebody shares a screen, once that happens, my hand goes up by itself.
Maybe you're just excited. We'll clear it for you.
Just ignore me if it shows up again.
Okay.
That's bad teacher behavior. Always answer a raised hand. Right. And then, the last case study, Who's Who, that has been made a supplemental activity as well. We added more detailed instructions for instructors about the plot thickens case studies. We broke down a couple of examples of ways you could do this, depending on the size of your class or depending on how crazy you want to get with it. And then we cleaned up the plot thickens case studies themselves, got rid of some just extra information, hopefully to get them going a little bit cleaner. And then we added discussion points for the instructors for answers to the questions of each case study. And then at the end, we also included resources, extra resources to help our licensees avoid becoming part of these troublesome trends. And then we updated the PowerPoint, of course, to match. Any questions about troublesome trends? Lastly, we have our introduction to Idaho water rights and easements and property transactions. The first change is we added the word introduction here. We thought that might make it a little bit more clear that we're not trying to make anybody a water expert. And so this is just an introductory overview. Another thing we did add is for an instructor note is to make sure that if you have students who have specific in-depth questions that you are referring them back to a water expert. We provided some resources towards the end of the material. So if they're just really interested in getting your opinion, please direct them there, save yourself and them. This is also probably the portion that will take all of your skills as an instructor to rein in discussion. We did not remove too much of the material from the pilot. We ran the outline by a subject matter expert, and he agreed that all of the material that was in there was pertinent and important. And so we didn't take too much out. We're happy to help with any, if you have questions about how you can better communicate it to students. If you're finding that students just can't stop talking about it, I'm always here to help kind of guide you through that process. I know this is kind of a hot topic because somebody will always have a crazy story about it, if not everybody. So trying to keep them on task will be a challenge, but I have faith. I believe in all of you. You can do it. Go team.
Alice, can I add something to that real quick?
Yes.
It was our intention to try to trim quite a bit of that down. I'll be honest, that was my thought. And when we reached out, we were told, no, you shouldn't. But so what we decided to do, you'll notice in the student materials that a lot of the slides and the images where we walk through how to go out and search for a water permit, I can't remember what else, but we moved some of that stuff that they might want to have, but you don't really need to spend class time into a supplemental handout that you can hand out to them and let them research on their own time so that you guys don't have to try to teach them how to find that information. We thought that would be a good match of providing the information, but not making you responsible for trying to explain it and walking through all that extra material. So then you can really focus on the important things they need to know about water.
We also added quite a few, maybe, well, I don't know, 3-ish important to note boxes, hopefully to kind of drag your students back on task to thinking about the big picture items rather than getting lost in the water weeds. We did take out a group discussion just so that for flow and for time's sake. In this section, it does mention the water legislation that also appears in the legislative section. Personally, I would probably discuss it a little bit more in the water section, just because I think contextually it's better there, but you're more than welcome to discuss it in detail on either place. But if your students are kind of curious, like, hey, we didn't really talk about that one, you can always say, we'll come to it later in the water section. Like Melissa said, the how to search for water rights is a supplemental handout that you can provide. We added contacts for water resources. So the Idaho Department of Water and then the Idaho Water Users Association gave that contact information. And then the last thing that we did is Paul Arrington, who was the one who presented at our pilot, he wrote us up kind of an FAQ of questions that he gets often. And so he provided that for us along with answers. And so that's the last page of the water portion. And it's a front and back handout that they could take just take with them. I think it'll be a great resource for them. We also had an activity along with that FAQ sheet where they pretend or practice answering questions if they get them from sellers or buyers using some of these questions. So I think it'll be really great. We did leave most of the material that Paul provided at the pilot as far as the pictures for blocking access or what springs and wells and all that kind of stuff look like. And we did leave in all those instructor notes so that you know what you're talking about on each slide. So do keep that in mind if you add anything. It will change the slide numbers in the instructor notes. So just be aware of that. Any questions about any portion of Core 2022?
Alice, sorry, I feel like I should have maybe told you that I had a couple of ideas ahead of time. Sorry. Do you want to talk about what Paul wants to do with the class, like his visits that he might make?
Oh yeah, okay. So Paul, our water expert who presented at Core, he's really interested to see how this is disseminated to licensees. So he's been reaching out, trying to see if he can attend a class just to see. I've told him to reach out to the providers once the schedule gets posted. I did say that he asked if he could just show up, but I recommended that he reach out and make sure there's enough space for him. But if he does reach out, I would take him up on that offer. He is super, super smart, and he is super, obviously he knows a ton about water, and he's quite a good speaker, and puts it in nice everyday terms that even I understood it, and I've never done anything with that. So if he does reach out to you, or if you would like him to attend your class, I believe he's mostly in kind of the Boise area, but I know he does travel, you're more than welcome to reach out to him and say, hey, we're teaching this class then, do you want to come? And if he's available, I bet he probably will. Also, if you're a provider, I did say if he did reach out that you guys would probably waive a fee if you have one associated with your class. You don't have to, but if you want him for a water expert, I'm just saying. But I think if he did come to your class, that class would probably be the most informed and luckiest class, personally. If you don't have questions about that, you are free to live your best dreams on this Thursday afternoon.